Welcome to the 700 Club. $110 billion for roads and bridges, $65 billion to boost internet access, and $55 billion to upgrade water and sewer systems. Today, the president is expected to sign into law the first part of his infrastructure bill.
The president's plan also includes $500 million for tree equity, billions for climate change, and money to China for research. So was the recent so-called rejection election a wake-up call for the Democrats? Not likely. Dale Hurd explains.
Democrats are saying that if they'd only passed the infrastructure bill sooner, they would have won the Virginia governor's race. Republicans are saying the Democrats still don't get it.
The resolution is adopted.
After months of Democratic infighting, the $1.2 trillion so-called roads and bridges bill is headed to Joe Biden's desk for his signature, the first part of his so-called Build Back Better agenda.
We took a monumental step forward as a nation. We're just getting started.
The legislation is billed as the single largest investment in the nation's roads, bridges, rail lines, and airports in decades. It includes $110 billion for roads and bridges, $66 billion for Amtrak, $65 billion to improve internet access, and $55 billion to upgrade water and sewer systems. But it also includes $500 million for tree equity, making sure streets have the right balance of trees, billions for climate change, and even gives money to China for research. Democratic leaders Sunday insisted that if the bill had been passed before last Tuesday's Virginia gubernatorial election, Terry McAuliffe would have won.
Well, look, I do think the voters sent a message on Tuesday. They wanted to see more action in Washington.
We should have passed these bills in early October. If we had, it would have helped Terry McAuliffe probably win the governor's race.
Republicans say the Democrats did not get the message voters were sending last Tuesday, that Americans struggling to make ends meet under the pandemic and rising inflation are in no mood for big spending in Washington.
You would think this would be a wake-up call for the Democrats. It was a rejection election. Voters overwhelmingly across the country rejected these radical policies of the Democrats, which have caused inflation, rising prices.
And Republicans see a giant red wave sweeping the country next year.
And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the rest of the clown car in Washington, is setting the stage for a victory in 2022, a bigger victory in 2024.
Some House Democrats do see the writing on the wall from last Tuesday's elections, with increasing numbers announcing they're retiring. Polls not only show Joe Biden's approval rating at 38%, but nearly two-thirds of Americans and almost a third of Democrats don't want him to run again. And the second part of Biden's infrastructure package could make voters even angrier. A multi-trillion-dollar social spending bill Republicans say is nothing more than socialism. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Every once in a while, I wonder, do both parties get it? And are both of them completely tone deaf to what's happening in the country today? If you think the Virginia election is all about not passing the infrastructure bill, please think again. It had nothing to do with it. At the same time, if you think it's a setup for 2022 and 2024, think again. A whole lot can change in a year, and certainly a whole lot can change in 3 years. So what's this race about? Well, I have to give credit to Youngkin. He actually listened to voters, and specifically swing voters, and specifically mothers who are concerned about their children in school. It's not about critical race theory. It's not even about sexual assault in a bathroom. It has to do with mothers trying to teach their kids at home in the middle of a pandemic and being extraordinarily worried that their children are being left behind, that they weren't learning at the rate they should. How can we get schools open? And then you had a candidate on the other side who said parents shouldn't have any voice in how their children are being educated. And that blew up the race. At the same time, Youngkin danced. He certainly had a remarkable dance to say, I'm listening to the school situation. I'm listening to parents. And he managed to both keep the Trump supporters in his camp and keep President Trump out of the race. The other side didn't see that, and they were running against President Trump. They weren't running against our new governor, Youngkin. These are the lessons that I'm taking away from it. Looking forward a year from now during the midterms, if you think it's all about massive spending bills and let's pass more massive spending, please think again. In other news, grave statutory and constitutional issues. Well, that's the phrase the Fifth Circuit used in blocking the Biden administration's vaccine mandate over the weekend. And I've got to correct myself. I told Terry on this show last week I didn't see federal courts stepping in, that they would give the administration broad authority to institute the mandate. And boy, the Fifth Circuit has proved me wrong. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
We all get it wrong every once in a while, Gordon. The administration has until 5 p.m. today to respond to the ruling by the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. At least 27 states sued to block the mandate, which affects some 84 million employees nationwide. Meanwhile, federal employees face a deadline today to get their final shots. While most report they are complying, thousands are seeking exemptions based on religious grounds. Well, businesses are bracing for the impact of the vaccine mandate, including one industry that's vital to keeping the supply chain in motion, trucking. As CBN's Brody Carter reports, the mandate is just one potential sticking point in the bottleneck behind delays, ranging from computer chips to toilet paper to Christmas gifts.
Truckers who move cargo are dropping in droves. Now there are concerns the administration's vaccine mandate will force even more truckers off the road.
Truckers are independent people thinking. Out here, you're counting on yourself. There's no one pushing you to go down that road.
That should be a personal choice on no matter who you are, no matter where you are, and no matter what you do.
This on top of President Biden's round-the-clock mandate last month, which some say won't work.
The misinformation, I think, was by saying, okay, Biden just ordered all the ports 24/7. That's going to solve the problem. No, it won't.
For 15 years, Captain Manny Aschemeyer oversaw our nation's largest port complex as executive director at the Marine Exchange for Southern California.
Answering that age-old question, has my ship come in? And we answer that question literally thousands of times a day.
Based on his experience, Captain Manny says the around-the-clock mandate only works if each part of the distribution chain plays by the same rules.
When you deliver that cargo to a distribution center or a warehouse or some guy's business, and they're not open, they're only open 8 to 5, then 24/7 doesn't help much because they can't leave that box there, or if they leave that box there, it sits.
The logistical nightmare certainly begins at the ports. If this map looks complicated, that's because it is. In this snapshot from a record-breaking day in October, these nearly 100 markers represent ships waiting to unload in the LA Long Beach port complex. Dozens more wait off the coast for room to get to port.
So you have a lot of things that are stacking on top of one another that's creating this glut of cargo coming to the States.
Backlogs began due to COVID shutdowns, which sparked massive warehouse layoffs. Then the hyper-buying of goods to restock shelves followed, leaving only limited staff to do the work.
Well, I would say every deadline's being missed. Many of them have been on their ships now for nearly 2 years, unable to get a relief. And that is a nasty reality.
Captain Manny says the real panic in the pantry comes from what's happening in the trucking industry.
The last mile in trade is the most critical. That's when it goes from the warehouse to the store shelf. And that's usually done by a truck.
California independent truckers are fighting an uphill battle with the state legislature. That's because Assembly Bill 5, which is intended to give Uber and Lyft drivers minimum wage and other benefits, also affects about half of the state's truckers. The bill stops them from operating their own rigs by their own rules.
And a lot of independent contractors simply took a hike and went to other ports around the country to work, or frankly got out of the business altogether.
Another hurdle is a California environmental group barring truckers from registering rigs built before 2010.
And suddenly you're telling a guy that's got a truck that's 10 and a half years old, they say, well, you can't use it anymore.
Given these restraints and driver shortages, Captain Manny says store shelves will sit bare past Christmas, and the cost of everything will continue going up.
The West Coast has evolved the way it has through no one's fault.
While that might be true, more trouble could lay ahead. Given the excessive backup in incoming cargo, contracts for about 15,000 West Coast dock workers are set to expire next summer. This as union workers fight the impact of automation, which is expected to increase at more terminals. I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. Shortages are leading to higher energy prices this winter. Industry officials predicting significant price hikes. Propane increasing by 54%, natural gas up 30% or higher, heating oil increasing to 43%, electricity up 6%. Gasoline has jumped another 5 cents, now at $3.50 a gallon. Speaking on CNN Sunday, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm pointed the finger at the oil and gas industry.
It will be more expensive this year than last year. The oil and gas companies are not flipping the switch as quickly as the demand requires.
Critics say the Biden administration policies like shutting down the Keystone Pipeline have hurt America's energy independence. The administration also reportedly is considering closing down another pipeline, Michigan's Line 5, which transmits up to 540,000 barrels of crude oil to the state from Canada daily. Well, President Biden is condemning an assassination attempt against Iraq's prime minister. 3 drones carrying explosives targeted his residence in the Green Zone. Only one reached the building. The prime minister was not hurt, but 7 of his security detail were injured. The attack coming just days after violent protests between government forces and Iranian-backed political parties. Well, moving now to Israel, where Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said he does not support a U.S. plan to reopen a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem. The U.S. recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel back in 2017 and moved its embassy there the following year. A consulate for Palestinian affairs was put under the authority of the embassy. Critics say reopening the consulate in Jerusalem would be a step towards dividing the city.
There's so much more we agree upon with our American friends than we disagree upon, but indeed, our position is, and it was presented very clearly and openly to our American friends, that there's no room for another American consulate in Jerusalem.
Palestinians agree the consulate would constitute the seed of a U.S. embassy in a potential Palestinian state. Gordon?
I certainly applaud Prime Minister Naftali Bennett for standing up to the U.S. State Department, to standing up to the American administration. They're trying to roll things back, create an embassy, a consulate to the Palestinian Authority in Jerusalem. That's a signal that Jerusalem could be the potential capital for a Palestinian state, and the city would once again be divided. We need to keep in mind Scripture. You do not divide the land. This is not something you do. Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel. Israel, as a sovereign state, gets to designate their capital, just like all other sovereign states. Israel is unique in that it's the only sovereign state that's designated its capital as Jerusalem, and the other nations don't recognize it. So the Trump administration broke through all of that, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moved our embassy there, and shut down the Palestinian consulate. For those that think there should be a Palestinian consulate, let me ask a very simple question. Do the Palestinians actually want a Palestinian state? They've proven through their behavior, through their lack of negotiations, lack of coming to the peace table, the famous phrase, the Arabs have never refused an opportunity to refuse an opportunity. They have never taken the step for statehood. They have never even tried to develop the infrastructure for statehood. So why in the world do you think they want a two-state solution? They've been quite adamant over 70 years. They want to drive Israel into the sea. They want a one-state solution governed by Palestinians.